So I decided to do a short video. A lot of people ask about bringing fish to a koi show and what happens and how it works. So I'm just gonna kind of run through, I guess, some of the basics of how fish get here, what happens when they get here, what happens after they're in and settle down, what it looks like, just to kind of give you a little look and feel of the other side of the koi show, not just looking at the fish in the vat, which is interesting, and I need to do that as well. But I guess this is more educational. I'm not an expert. When we get into the middle of this video, hopefully I'll find some people that can speak on it. But you can see that there are big blue vats. At this particular show, they have your choice between a 6-foot vat and a 8-foot vat. Depending on how many fish you got, that's what you end up choosing. They assign points to the length of your fish and a maximum point per tank, and that is to ensure that you don't overstock these tanks because they're not filtered. So you don't want the tank to be overstocked and the ammonia to rise. Although there is a water quality person that is here that is managing the water, and they have their own protocols for what they actually do at the show. So you'll see them walking about, measuring, testing, adding different things to the water, some ammonia binders and other things. So we'll go through how they get here. So koi usually get here via boxes, coolers, or transport tanks. So we will take a quick glance at a box. So here's what a typical box looks like that has come from Japan at some point and traveled a couple of times. But basically the fish are double bagged in their box long ways with just enough water to cover their gill plate and their backs. And then it's filled with 100% oxygen and it's secured. The box is sealed up. Whenever you are traveling with large fish, you have to ride with the box in the car this way, so that when the car is going down the road, when you stop and go, the fish roll side to side. If they're riding this way, when the car stop and go, the fish nose hits the front of the bag or the tail hits the back of the bag, and you'll get to the show and your fish has a bruised nose or a bruised or shredded tail. You can still get that same damage either way, just depending on how rowdy your fish are and how hard you hit those turns. So that is one way they get to the show, and I will cut and show you the next method of arrival. So this is a vendor vehicle, but this is a travel tank. It's basically strapped to the back of a pickup truck, and you can see that green tube going into the transport tank that is delivering aeration, but it's 100% oxygen. I've never done this form of travel, but from what I understand, if you fill this halfway full, it allows the water to slosh more violently and you can end up with more damage on your fish. So you do need to fill them pretty much all the way up, just leaving a little air gap at the top. Even when we watch the videos in Japan of them doing the harvest, you'll notice on those truck-based transport tanks, they tend to fill them all the way to the top and then zip them shut. There's another vendor transport tank. It's a lot of transport tank. There's different variations, and there's little smaller pop-up versions that most of us hobbyists typically use if we're going to use a transport tank, but it's all the same philosophy. They just do this every day, and that's kind of how they roll. The other method is coolers, and the cooler is basically the same as using a box, except it's insulated, it's a little more secure, it's a little bit easier on the fish, especially if you're traveling in extreme temperatures, to kind of help control it, whereas a box does not. Boxes typically don't work very well for large fish. Once you get over 24 inches, it can get kind of difficult to find a box that's big enough and sturdy enough for those big fish. So coolers typically work better. So after you arrive, you get here, and just like when you get your fish and get them home, you float the bags. They usually have a system in which they, like at this show, they had little rubber duckies floating, and they have a system to kind of indicate what tanks have been treated and what tanks have not been treated, just to kind of keep up. They go above and beyond in making sure that the water quality is good, and that there's safety for the fish, and people not touching the water and doing different things. So as the fish are arriving on the Friday before the show, typically, you will see a group of people out here doing benching. And benching is when they are measuring and filling out the paperwork on each tank and owner and fish, classifying them into size and variety. So lots of nets are used, lots of nets, lots of tubs, lots of bowls are used. And this is the most important part of the show from a fish's perspective. And they disinfect the nets, they dip and disinfect the bowls, dip and disinfect your arms, and anything that may touch the next tank. They disinfect it, and then they rinse it. Even though the likelihood of these stacked here have already been dipped and rinsed, you still do it again when you go to use this bowl on your tank or anybody's tank. So this is very important. Once they put them in the bowl and they use the tape measure in here to get their size, they oftentimes will go ahead and put these little marks in here to indicate where the size range is for size 1 through 6 or up, depending on how big the fish are to the show and how many fish they got. They'll do that just to make it easier. You don't hear them call out that the fish is 62 cms. They'll just say size 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's kind of how they do it. So what you'll see happen next is, as they're taking that data, they're taking it to a group of people inside that's working on the computer. They take that information and they place it in a database that provides these sheets. And you can see on the sheet, every tank in this show is numbered. This is tank 14, and each fish gets an ID. This is a size 1 kohaku that's under 8 inches. And that is the fish's information. You can notice that there is no information on the owner on this. So when the judges come by and they're judging, they don't have any bias in that manner. That's the reason for that format being done. You can see that at this particular show, the tanks are aerated. That aeration is from a system that's above here, which I really like it. At some shows, they run it along the floor. There's different ways of doing it. This way, you don't have to worry about people really kicking the air and knocking it loose inadvertently. So that works out pretty good in this large tent area. So we're moving over to a vendor tank. So you have the tank of the people who bring fish, and you put your fish in your tank. But if you're at the show, you can buy fish, and they can be automatically entered into the show without any fee. Right here in tank 51 is a vendor tank for the koi store, and there's Carl Forrest there, and there's Vicky right there. She's all cool and chill with her sunglasses on at 8 o'clock in the morning. But you can see they are bagging up some owners' fish to prepare to take them home. And these are pooled, so everyone who buy fish from the koi store would have put their fish in 1 or 2 vendor tanks. It depends on how many fish the vendor anticipates selling as to how many vendor tanks that person may get. But that's pretty much it. Sometimes the vendors have their own equipment. Sometimes the vendors may use the show equipment. It just really depends. But typically vendors only go between their stuff, and they don't share stuff with the rest of the show. So that's kind of getting to the koi show, getting the fish into the show. If I didn't say it, the vendor tank fish are benched. are put into categories just like everybody else's fish. I think I may have said that this show actually had, I think, 250 fish entered into the show, maybe more. But that's how they get here. That's how they get set up. On Saturday, before noon, usually mid-morning, the judges come out and they begin their judging. They have their judges sheet. They have scribes who walk around and write for them. They tape off the tent so that nobody can walk in the middle of the tent except the people working the show during the show. The judges will judge, and depending on how many fish they got, how difficult the competition is, it determines how long it takes for them to judge the show. And that pretty much happens all evening. Sometimes we've been sitting in banquets waiting for judges to finish the results and bring them to shows. That's usually an indication of the quality of fish that showed up at that show on that day. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. So after the banquet is done and you arrive, this is actually Sunday morning. They have a judges walkthrough, usually somewhere between 10:30 and noon, depending on the show. The judges walk around and they take the grand champions of the major awards and they talk about them and tell everybody why they won, what made them so good, and what to look for, what not to look for, or what to do to make them better or to get there. They give you a lot of advice. It's a chance to ask questions and learn a lot of information. They typically ask that people not take the fish home until the judges walkthrough is finished, so everybody have a chance to kind of review and go over and learn. But you can get special permission to leave if you have to. But that is pretty much in a nutshell. Going home is basically in the reverse. Disinfect, use the equipment. They provide you travel water that they treat or get prepared. When you come use this, you either have to disinfect your arms and hands, use a clean bag, or you can use a pitcher or a bucket that you have to disinfect through the same process to get your fish home. You bag them up and you leave and you go home. But that is pretty much coming to and leaving a koi show in a nutshell. I left out a million behind the scene details, but hopefully this kind of helped give people an idea of what arriving to the koi show looks like and what works. At this show, this is only the outside. This is only the outside with a couple of vendors on the end, but the rest of these are all show tanks.